Thank you so much for coming out to Center for Photography at Woodstock, now in Kingston. My name is Sarah Danziger. I'm the education coordinator here at CPW. Tonight, for Meet the Artist, every Thursday we have Meet the Artist. Tonight we're really lucky to be joined by three incredible women, Leslie Deschler, Canossi, Zoraida Lopez-Diago, and Qiana Mestrich. I believe we're going to start out with Qiana, so I'm going to read a little bit of her bio. Qiana Mestrich is a photography-focused interdisciplinary artist, writer, and mother working in between Brooklyn and Saugerties, New York. Working primarily within autobiography, Mestrich's research-led practice explores personal and public archives to investigate Black mixed-race identity from her perspective as a first-generation American. Knowledge sharing and community building is a vital part of Mestrich's practice. In 2007, she founded Dodge and Burn, Decolonizing Photography History, established in 2007, an arts initiative that aims to diversify the medium's history by advocating for photographers of color. Dodge and Burn began as a blog, and from 2014 to 2022 functioned as a monthly critique group meeting in person and virtually. Her forthcoming book, based on the blog's past interviews, will be published by Routledge, Taylor, and Francis. Qiana is also included in this wonderful book, Black Matrilineage, Photography and Representation, which was co-created by Leslie and Zoraida. Can we welcome, warm welcome for Qiana?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. It's so great to be here. Let's get started. So the format for tonight is going to be, I'm going to just talk a little bit about my work, and then Zoraida and Leslie will present about their organization, Women Picturing Revolution, as well as the book that Sarah just mentioned. And then we'll have a little bit of a Q&A afterwards with the three of us. All right. So before I kind of get into my work, I really kind of wanted to talk a little bit about sort of early photographic encounters of Black motherhood and matrilineage, personally, starting with my own family archive. This is a picture of my mom and me at 8 months old and my first trip to Panama. She is from Panama, Central America. And she raised me as a single mother in New York City in the 70s and 80s. And I bring this picture up just to say, and I think a lot of the subsequent pictures of mothers that you'll see are also just images of mothers with their children. But for me, looking at my family archive over the years, the question of like, what did single Black motherhood look like within my own family archive always came up. And this is a picture that I hold dear. Also thinking about sort of mid-century representations of Black motherhood through the lens of a non-Black photographer. Consuelo Kanaga is one of my all-time favorites, Black and white photographers. For those of you who don't know her, she was an American-born Swiss photographer of Swiss heritage, who, like her better-known contemporary Dorothea Lange, worked as a photojournalist from 1915 to the 60s. I love this image. I love the child's look and gaze upon his mother. I'll show you a couple more images of Consuelo's. This is titled, She is a Tree of Life to Them. And this is image from 1950. Consuelo examines the role of the mother as a protector. So you can see sort of the mom here is kind of, holding her children really close, but the children's faces are fairly obscured, so our eye kind of is really drawn to the mother herself. And she's depicted from this kind of low vantage point, which further accentuates her strength and asserting the sort of fierce protection of her children. But for me, this image kind of really deserves further discussion and investigation in light of contemporary conversations around self-care and this kind of archetype of the strong Black woman. The strong Black woman archetype describes a cultural pattern where Black women are expected to present as physically and mentally strong, regardless of past and ongoing stressors. The strong Black woman archetype has served the historical purpose of aiding survival for Black women throughout years of racial and gender oppression. However, The practice has also been associated with adverse mental health and with behaviors as they are expected to selflessly meet the needs of their family and community, and as such may embrace self-silencing in their interpersonal relationships. This is another beautiful image from Consuelo Kanaga. Her work is really unique because at this time she was really drawn to depicting African Americans. But I feel like her view and her perspective is one of joy for the most part. And she, in the statement of her work, she said she simply tried to show the beauty of Black people. And she didn't necessarily care for showing context, which is why a lot of these images are so closely cropped and shot. And she really wanted to engage the viewer by taking pictures of their faces close up. And she was taught by Stieglitz, but didn't just rely on in-camera composition and often reworked her prints tirelessly by cropping and manipulating tonal values to achieve her aesthetic vision. And I think that sort of tonal investigation in the darkroom also benefited her, photographing darker skinned people who, as we because as we know, photography chemistry was not created with darker skinned people in mind. Moving on to another image that I love. Sorry, Leslie, you're totally blocked. But I love to kind of think about motherhood in the sense of looking at it from a historical event like segregation. What does Black motherhood look like in this time period? This is an image from Ruth Orkin from an early series of her New York photojournalism work. Not sure where that noise is coming from, maybe in the window. Orkin photographed train passengers waiting outside of Manhattan's Pennsylvania station. This image of a Black mother and child sitting on their luggage reflects the little discussed history of segregated transportation in northern United States. Through the 1940s, Penn Station officials often assigned Black travelers seats in Jim Crow cars on southbound trains. And looking at, some of you might be familiar with this image, but looking again at, sort of Gordon Parks's work around segregation as well. This is from his series Segregation Stories. Thinking about, the interior lives of Black mothers and their children. How did they explain things like racial inequality and ill treatment in a society that was, sort of against them simply based on their skin color? How did they talk about topics like colorism and passing, or perhaps the erasure of indigenous heritage amongst their own families? So when an image like this kind of makes me think of that, just simply as being as a mother myself and thinking about all of the things that we have to constantly explain to our children about how life is and their place in the world socially. I think we really can kind of look at photography and photographs of Black mothers in particular when we're discussing these questions or evaluating these questions. This is Clarissa Sy, and sort of she's reevaluating motherhood in her own family album. This is from a series called Reframing the Past that she did over a period of 10 years, 1994 to 1994. Could also be titled Rereading the Family Album. From 1984 to 1994, Sly's work centered on reinvestigation and reevaluation of her family photo album. Growing up in the blue-collar Black neighborhood of Halls Hill in Arlington, Virginia in the 1950s, keeping up the family album was something the artist took great pride in, not realizing that her early family album project was created through the lens of a stereotypical white American family. She saw the project as making a record of positive images of her Black family. And as we see here, she's taking this sort of family album image, but also rewritten over it some her own narrative, which is a really interesting kind of combination of text and photography. And I feel like Clarissa is also really not very well known within photography history. So I hope that we can rediscover her work. This is an image that I really love. Back when I was a teenager, I interned at Jack Tilton Gallery, which at the time was based in Soho. in New York City. And so this image it's by Lyle Eston Harris, who I believe is also an upstate New York resident now. Um, this is a series of 20 by 24-inch dye diffusion Polaroids interspersed with Cibachrome prints, reproducing a selection of images from his family's photo archives, comprised Harris's first solo exhibition in 1994. So I got to see these close up as an intern during his solo exhibition at Jack Tilton Gallery. Writing in Black art and culture in the 20th century, Richard Powell described this work as, quote, a complete version of various notions of identity, gender, sexual, and familial, which ironically caused another indicator of identity, Blackness, to twist, snake, and splice itself into a complex yet irreducible ingredient, unquote. And what's great about this is that the quote unquote father or male sort of character in the picture is another photographer, Renee Cox, and they're holding one of Renee's sons, and that is Lyle Ashton Harris as well on the right. How do we consider transcultural motherhood? This is one of my favorite artists, photographic artists for sure. Maria Magdalena Los Campos, and she says here about this work, my subjects are often my Afro-Cuban relatives as well as myself. My themes are cross-cultural and cross-generational. Race and gender expressed in symbols of matriarchy and maternity are thematic ideas. And this, her work is incredible. She also works in large format Polaroid in this sort of very grid format. And this is one of, I believe it's her grandmother, one of her matriarchs in her family. But I really love this sort of, string tied here in between them, and sort of this, these maternal connections, these familial connections, both expressed physically and thematically in the work. So now I'll go into talking about some of my own work. This is a series that I self-published as a book in 2016 called Hard to Place. Hard to Place is a true story about race, family, and the child welfare system in post-war Britain, combining confidential government documentation, archival, and autobiographical photography. This series illustrates the childhood of Joseph, an orphan boy of Nigerian and Irish parentage, growing up in 1960s and 70s London. I self-funded and published Hard to Place in 2016 as a paperback photography book. The book's first spread features a portrait of Joseph's father on the left and his mother on the right. I chose the book form to represent this series in direct relation to the family album or scrapbook, mediums meant to preserve memories. For many, like Joseph, these personal family archives are non-existent or incomplete. The interracial pairing of Joseph's parents was important to create it as a common type of photograph found in family albums. This coupling, preserved in photographic emotion, has been a constant in the history of the medium, so much so that people who've been raised by both parents often take this kind of photograph for granted, not realizing how many people worldwide do not have this visual affirmation of the love that created them. I don't know why Joseph's parents were never photographed together, but I do recognize the power of this formal arrangement, specifically in the shaping of a mixed race identity. As a half-caste child in England, Joseph was considered hard to place, quote unquote, amongst the mostly white adoptive families. Consequently, Joseph was placed in care 8 different times from ages 3 to 17. This is a quote that was written by Dr. Alexandrina Agloro about the work. It reads, the title Hard to Place references the difficulty of placing Joseph in adoption because of his mixed heritage, but also the title alludes to the physical ambiguity of the multiracial body. What are you is a frequent question a mixed body hears because the ways our bodies present themselves make us hard to place as well. Joseph is my husband. On our first date, he nervously told me his life story, continuously pulling at his sleeves to hide the ink of bad decisions made during his teenage years as a Black skinhead. The little boy in the color documentary images seen in Hard to Place is our son. My lens has captured tender, curious, and mundane moments in our home, along with some other more emotional family situations. In these images, our son often becomes that precocious yet lonely little boy I imagine his father was as a child. Hard to Place began in 2013 when, under the United Kingdom's Data Protection Act of 1998, Joseph received two legal-sized books stuffed with photocopied files documenting the years he had spent as an orphan. It wasn't until late 2015 that I began pairing my own documentary images with this confidential text, the goal being to provide a visual alternative to this official narrative of Joseph's childhood. And what you see here in the text is an article that was written as a last-ditch attempt to get Joseph adopted. And it says, "Little Joe needs love and care." And it goes on to talk about how, children who are orphans have all of these handicaps. But it says, what constitutes a handicap? Mental retardation and physical disability, of course. But if a child is Black or if of mixed race, then that is a handicap too. The documents he received from the London Borough of Camden included typed and handwritten text authored by social workers observing both Joseph and his mother, Maura, aka Maureen, who often needed financial and housing assistance. In some cases, I've left the text as is. Other times, I've reworked the text in poem form to highlight the detached tone and the clinical observatory nature of the situation. Here, this is kind of text describing Joseph's mother, Maureen. It says, Maureen has an unstable Irish temperament, personality disorder, lives with Joe, nearly 7, half-caste, in council accommodation. She is not very intelligent and finds life hard, her consequential loneliness. The archival images show Maureen as a vibrant woman, despite the inner and outer struggles she endured living as a single Irish woman with a Black child in a former colonial empire. Using my own documentary images, I try to represent a or the mother in this story, cultivating and practicing a compassion for a mother-in-law that I've never known. The dominant narrative of mixed-race orphans is that they are all born of wars, the product of illicit love affairs or rapes between women and the soldiers that occupied their countries. Some popular examples of these quote-unquote occupation babies include those born during post-World War II in Japan and during the Korean War. It's interesting to note that although white soldiers fathered children often at higher rates, the offspring of Black soldiers were far more ostracized. The orphan is a common human archetype. There have been many notable celebrities, world leaders, figures within classical history and religious scripture, in literature, even comic book heroes who began life as orphans. Yet there has been very little within popular culture, international news, or the arts about ordinary children made orphan because of the strain of historical and everyday racist conditions. We don't often hear of the children abandoned by one or both parents because of the stress of discrimination from society and their respective family members that has fractured their unions. What of these children made orphan under the strain of historical racism and post-colonial conditions in the Western world? And the text here reads, he wants to be fostered by a Black family, would feel, quote, the odd one out with a white family. She verbally abused him on Sunday by calling him black shit. Alone and marginalized, these children bear the intolerable weight of their parents' failed loves and that of mankind's dark, unsettled history with the constructs of race. This is another quote by curator Paula Kufer, who wrote about this work as well. She says, the different visual elements in Hard to Place convey that it is a difficult and deeply personal story to tell and understand, one that would inevitably have some gaps. And now I'll talk about Thrall. This is the last series that I'll speak about. This was a series that I sort of began pre-pandemic and also continued during the pandemic as well. It's a series that sort of works. I'm working with my children and my husband as well, in a really sort of domestic studio environment as well as kind of an open air studio environment. Um, Certainly, there's a lot of meaning behind a lot of the objects used. A lot of the objects used are very personal. Um, but I think there's also, for me, an emphasis on aesthetics and certainly working within a particular color palette. Um, there's also a lot in this work in terms of referencing and being in conversation with photographers that I admire, photographers. I'm a sort of voracious reader and absorber of photography history. Love reading about people who have come before me in photography. For example, this is titled Hoja Seca after Flor Garduño. There's a picture that Flor has. I thought I had it in the slideshow, but there's a picture that she has of a woman just taking cover in the studio, and she's underneath this massive leaf. And kind of in the editing of this work, I came to realize that there were a lot of these images are sort of burnt in my mind. A lot of these images that I've loved over the years, and they kind of slowly seep their way into my work as well. This image is titled "Strange Bush." Hair is a big subject for me in general, and I think as a Black mother, as a woman of color, hair is just part of my identity. It's something that we have to constantly deal with in one way or another, and more so once you have children and have children have different textured hair from you. We have like a hair basket at home with all of our hair accoutrements to deal with our hair. My children have 2 different types of hair texture than I do. This particular image I made using my son's hair, and it was after his first haircut. And I've always had this, and I think it's passed down in my family too. I've always had this sort of suspicion of like someone having your hair after a haircut, that something, could be done with it something nefarious could be done with it. So I kept his hair, and I still keep my children's hair. But, this sort of title, Strange Bush, is kind of a riff on, the popular song, Billie Holiday's song, Strange Fruit, but also referencing a lot of the internal dialogue within my family about hair as well, and a lot of criticism within my family in particular about how hair is kept and how it's neat and how it's presentable and how it's respectable and all of that conversation. So I think all of the musings of all of those conversations were channeled into the making of this particular image. I feel like this series almost sort of began with this image. This was a classical Greek statue that was on view, and it's really washed out here, but it is very washed out in the photograph as well. It's called Pandora's Misfortune. It's a statue of Pandora, and she's holding the box of the world's evils, right? As in the story, Pandora is the Greek goddess who unleashed the world's evils onto the world because she was so curious. But this image, when I came across this sculpture in the museum, it was just during a regular family trip to the Brooklyn Museum, and I got off on the 2nd floor, and there was this sculpture in front of this gleaming window light. And for me, it was just like this reminder of, just these standards of beauty that we see every day in our cultural institutions. And the Brooklyn Museum has changed quite a bit since then in terms of who they represent and what they show. They've done a really great job of mixing in a lot of their classical and sort of ancient paintings and architecture in with a lot of more contemporary works, which I think is a great way to sort of bring people in, bring, your average person into this really institutional museum space. But yeah, for me, this image is certainly a critique of white spaces that uphold white standards of beauty. This one's called Civilization's Dark Tendencies. So a lot of the images in here show me kind of playing with my children, allowing them to play. I have to photograph really quickly when I'm photographing my children, as anybody who's photographed children knows. Oftentimes don't even know what I'm getting in the end. But here is an image where you see some wishbones, and wishbones in my family are sort of symbolic of my mother. And my mother is not in this series. She's the only surviving grandparent in our family for my children. But this is kind of my way of putting her into the work, because she gifted these wishbones, and she still continues to gift wishbones to my children, thinking that they will make something out of them, some sort of arts or crafts piece out of them. And here you see the wishbones again in this image. It's called the right to wear war. Excuse me, that's kind of a tongue twister. But the wishbones here are kind of, symbolic of medals and medallions that would be worn in military jacket or a military officer's jacket. So my son in the middle of a dance called the Orange Justice, which some of you may or may not know. See some of the younger people in the audience smirking. But yeah, I've shown this piece as well as sort of a grid, kind of Muybridge style, to sort of show the motion that goes into this dance. But this was like the first time where he really got a dance down, like a popular dance down. So he was just so psyched. Yeah, this was made upstate here in Saugerties. This one's called Camouflage. I don't know if you can see, but I started making these backdrops as part of this series, just out of necessity. I feel like mothers are just masters at making something out of nothing, and in everyday life. And for me, I didn't have access or couldn't afford at that time studio backdrop paper. And so I just I took this brown craft paper that I got at Home Depot and started making my own backdrops, and took black spray paint and was kind of pulling up some of the weeds in our yard, and started, kind of making this sort of almost like a cyanotype, but not. It's not cyanotype because there's no light involved. There's no chemistry involved, but it sort of has that effect. And then just in taking this picture, a moth, which we have many of, just landed on the paper, and I thought it was just sort of beautiful how the colors totally mixed and matched the paper that I was making. This one's titled Not Coming Back Whole. Kind of references an Octavia Butler story, where the main character is sort of crossing between worlds, and at one point her limbs get stuck in the walls. This one's called Aperture. Again, a lot of the objects used in the series are sort of personal objects. This is a cowrie shell that I've had for years, symbolic of many different things culturally. Cowries have been used as currency in many cultures, also used in African diasporic religious rituals and ceremony. But here I really kind of looking at it as sort of a third eye or sort of a portal. And that is my last image. Thank you so much. We can leave it for afterwards, yeah. You guys want to go here?
Thank you, Qiana. That was wonderful. We were really lucky to have some of those images by a show that Qiana had curated here that also included Zoraida's work. So it was nice to hear you speak about them. Okay. So next, we're going to have Leslie and Zoraida come up. I will read each of their bios real quick. Leslie Deschler Canossi is a photography educator and facilitator. She holds an MFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art. Her research aims to reframe the history of photography, better reflecting a story of innovation that includes women. She is interested in creating conversations in support of deep creativity and representational justice. In 2016, she co-founded Women Picturing Revolution, an organization dedicated to women identifying photographers who have documented conflicts and crises in private realms and public spaces. She co-edited Black Matrilineage, Photography and Representation, Another Way of Knowing. Her personal and teaching practice centers on themes of care, mothering, and grief. Her course, Into the Fold, Mother-Artist Identity, which explores artist-parent identity through lens and performance-based work, was for the first of its kind offered at a major photographic institution. Leslie is a faculty member at the International Center of Photography, and for over 14 years, Leslie ran Fiber Ink Studio, printing for some of the world's greatest artists and institutions from emerging to high profile. Her expertise includes silver gelatin, analog type C, and wide format pigment printing. Leslie lives in Beacon, New York with her family on a mini homestead that includes honeybees. Zoraida Lopez-Diago is a photographer, curator, and activist. She is committed to centering the voices and histories of people from the African diaspora, with a particular focus on themes of gender, incarceration, migration, and climate change. Zoraida has exhibited at institutions throughout the Americas and has lectured about her work at institutions including Harvard University, the Tate Modern, and La Universidad de Antioquia, Colombia, among others. In 2022, she co-created Picturing Black Girlhood, an exhibition exploring Black girlhood that included more than 80 Black women, girls, and genderqueer artists working in photography and film. To date, this was the largest exhibition on Black girls in the world. In 20,000 square feet? Wow. In 2016, Zoraida co-founded Women Picturing Revolution, and through this project co-edited Black Matrilineage, Photography and Representation, Another Way of Knowing. Zoraida is an environmental activist and is the co-founder of Conservationists of Color, a national platform for people of color working in the land conservation movement. She serves as twice vice president of communications development and strategic partnership at the Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming. Zoraida also lives in Beacon with her husband and 2 sons, and in her spare time, she enjoys long walks in the woods. Same. Please give a warm welcome to Leslie and Zoraida. Sorry. Okay. Mirror. And one more thing. Full screen mode. Okay. So all you have to do is hit that.
All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for the kind invitation, and following you, Qiana, is really quite an honor. And thank you, CPW, as well. We're excited to be here. And we should say that actually this hot little thing they worked on for 5 years, this is the first time a public talk we've actually had it in our hands. So we'll indulge a little bit of reading as well with that. All right.
We'll talk a little bit about Women Picturing Revolution, how we got started, and then we'll go into sharing some work and some readings from the book.
Exactly. Do you want to start? All right. So just briefly, Women Picturing Revolution, we got together in about 2016. So Zoraida and I met years prior. We were living in the city, and I'm a printer, as mentioned. And I think we met because you were in a group show, and someone gave my name, and we just met and immediately started talking about photography. We met on the stone staircase outside the old ICP building, and just ended up talking more about old photography and history of photography. So we met in that way, and then very quickly we just I'm not sure who came to Beacon first. I can't remember. We connected through motherhood. That's a whole other story about that idea of being a mother artist, supporting one another. We exchanged a lot of conversations and items around that. But in 2016, just having so many conversations about photography over the dinner table, and we just decided that we really wanted to do something together to highlight the work of female identifying photographers, specifically who are working in conflict. So conflict could be described as both photojournalism and documentary practices, but also very personal work, deeply personal work. So that's kind of where we started out with Women Picturing Revolution.
So here are just a few examples of some of the classes and workshops that Leslie and I taught. We were so lucky to be able to Skype in Chaldea, a young woman at the Za'atari refugee camp in 2016. This was the largest refugee camp in the world. And Chaldea was working with Laura Dodgett. She has a project called Another Kind of Girl Collective. And Chaldea made a short film. It was featured in Sundance, LA Film Festivals, New York Film Festivals, and no one ever thought of Skyping her in to talk about her work. And so Leslie and I were so fortunate to be able to Skype Chaldea in from the Za'atari refugee camp to tell us about her process and how she made the work and how she made her film and why she made it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So at that time, we were just proposing workshops to various institutions and really kind of created something that we didn't see out there in the world that we wanted. You know, sometimes you just create things that you want to see in the world. I believe this is also the same seminar that Sheila Pre-Bright came in, which was really just so exciting. So small groups, really getting into conversation with participants, really highlighting the work. And then we were speaking to Qiana about, you know, how to frame this, and it was who were some key artists that inspired the work and also some publications. So we'll cover that as well.
And, you know, prior to Women Picturing Revolution coming together, Qiana and I co-curated a show at her studio place, Women as Witness. And I just, you know, had to jot a little note, Qiana, when you said making something out of nothing. And this show would not have happened without Qiana. It's true. Qiana, you know, opened her space. We co-curated this show that had women who were documenting war from all over the world. And Leslie graciously printed the work for photographers who couldn't ship their work to the U.S. And one of the artists was this woman, Heba, who was documenting the Arab Spring from inside her home in Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we saw these images, or when I saw these images, you had already encountered them. If I remember correctly, she spoke a lot about the raw experience of motherhood and also not being able to be out in the street because of being a mother for her safety. And that just really touched us quite a bit, really resonated. It was, I believe this is 2000, I can't remember exact date, but a lot of things were happening right around that time. So this work is one that just always motivated and stuck with us. And then just briefly, so you understand the structure of the WPR, you know, kind of interest in courses, there's about 5 or 6 key issues that we cover and talk about. So within each of these sections, there's like a series of artists that we either bring in or talk about their work or get into conversation. Migration, displacement, gender-based violence,
Landscapes of war, environmental degradation and climate change,
education. This is one of Sheila's images, revolution, reclamation. So we're working for a couple of years together. It was really lovely doing different classes around. And one of the books I think we have here leads into the Columbia.
Yeah, I mean, a book and a show that really, I think for a lot of women artists, Black women artists, was the We Wanted a Revolution show at Brooklyn Museum that was curated by Catherine Morris and Reject Lockley. And I mean, this, you know, I'm sure everyone in this room like has the show that really just kind of cracked things open. And that show that focused on second wave Black feminism, I think really opened up how we were thinking about mothering, motherhood, mother artists, creating something out of nothing, and just the communities that women were creating to support each other to make work.
Exactly. And also just as a book format, it's obviously very different than this, but there's a book about the show, but there's also a source book, which has become one of our kind of go-to books, but also a dream of ours is to have a source book of this way about, so like everything mentioned in this book, then there's a source book to accompany it. It's just a phenomenal piece of research here. And also just lifting, as Zoraida said, the idea of, artists at this time working, creating daycare for one another, basically what we come to call mutual aid was existing in such a strong way in this community of artists, of great artists. And at this time, you were at Iris.
Yeah, I was at Columbia University as a consultant in African American studies. And, they heard me coming in every week talking about WPR and our classes. And the former president, Dr. Samuel Roberts, said, why don't you teach something here? And Leslie and I said, okay, let's focus on, let's focus on Black women photographers. And we taught this really incredible one-day seminar to a room full of women that were interested. And the two guests that we had were Nona Faustine and Qiana V. Jackson.
So Qiana V. Jackson was one of the guest artists who came in, and we reference her quite a bit in the intro of the book. Something she talks about is fighting photography with photography. So just briefly, this is Qiana's a portrait. This is herself on the right, and a family portrait. So she spoke about growing up in New Jersey and going down the stairs and seeing all these wonderful multi-generational photographs of her family. And she calls her grandmother, her bougie grandmother. And just knowing that she has a history and this beautiful family legacy that she could see in photographs. And that was not reflected in the media, right? So she was creating her own kind of archive in a way. She spoke so deeply about her work, her many bodies of work, but it was always this theme leading back to this matrilineal, looking back, talking about multi-generational language of mother. So it was something that just started coming up in the class. And then, of course, Nona Faustine, who we worked so closely with over the years, talked about so much about her work. These are self-portraits. This is Nona on the right with her daughter, and on the left, her mother and her daughter, Queen. So Nona's work, probably you've known about Nona's work, but also, again, very much self-portraiture, her mother, her sister, her daughter. This was a very strong thread. And then in her language of her talk was, again, about this connection, this long connection between the matrilineal line, knowing and unknowing. That was just so strong in that class, in that seminar.
Yeah, and I think you see that in Nona's work, even, the title of the series being mitochondria.
Exactly.
Like you feel the weight of the lineage of Black mothering and Black motherhood being extended beyond her and her family, but something that's kind of rooted much deeper, stretching like time and space.
Yeah, that was a really, really special room. It was one of those rooms which everybody was, in conversation. It was a long day. We got very, very close, went out afterwards. And it was really something special. So what was wonderful is a few weeks later, we got an email from...
Yeah, so at Columbia, I got an email from Leven Press, this press in Belgium that, Leslie and I we weren't thinking about a book, but I got an email saying, would you be interested in pitching a book to Leven Press? And we spoke about it and we said, okay, what would we pitch a book on? And after that workshop at Columbia, the themes of focusing on Black mothering and Black motherhood just kind of made sense.
So the book is, it's an academic press out of Belgium, and it's we did an open call, but we also reached out directly to folks, and folks found us. There's a series of academic essays. There's a poem. There's also, it was really important for us to not only have, people that are really accustomed to this kind of format, but also emerging voices. We really wanted to crack open and break open that academic kind of format. So the book is archival images, contemporary images, digital culture, self-portraiture. But in the back of the book, we held that space for ourselves to curate, I think 30 some images in color. So this is just showing you a couple of spreads. We wrote the introduction.
We worked with all the essayists and edited the essays, which was a great process. And I think we really, in addition to forming relationships with the artists in the book, we just really formed nice relationships with the essayists in the book. And as Leslie mentioned, I think we really wanted to call into question in the academic press who's considered an expert. All too often, Black people, Black mothers in particular, are not considered the experts of our bodies, right? And we're seeing that now in this country. Women were not considered autonomous and experts to make decisions about our bodies. And we wanted to shift that in a bit. So there are essayists in the book who are considered untraditional, and we were just so lucky to have them contribute and to have a press that was open to even who we are. We're not professors
In the traditional sense. Right.
Yeah.
So the book was about 5 years because a lot happened in between. Would you like,
I had a
everything,
baby.
well, that was one.
Yeah.
That was the best one.
COVID.
The America's racial reckoning, and a lot of emphasis on Black maternal health and maternal mortality was coming to the light. So just a lot of things. So this was really, as you all know, it's like late nights, early mornings, lots of emails. Crazy, took a long time. So thank you, Leuven, for your patience, if you're listening. And then we just wanted to share briefly before we get into individual artists and the color plates, just again, another edition of showing the spread. We're very proud of the contributing artist list. Everyone said yes.
Everyone said yes. Yeah.
Everyone's been so patient. Thank you, Qiana. And then just a quick, give you an idea of over 40 international contributors. And then I think what we'd like to do is read a little bit from the book, if you all don't mind.
And we chose to begin with a section in the intro that talks a little bit about Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass. And we both thought Sojourner Truth was so important to thinking about, like Kingston, the history of the land in this place, and the relationships that Sojourner Truth has to this area in particular. It was just really nice to start our reading with her. So I'll begin. The link between photography, representation, and Black activism can be traced back to the early days of the medium, when prominent abolitionists and orators, Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass, understood how images could mold narratives. Both Truth and Douglass knew that through photography, they could engage in what scholar Lee Rayford calls critical Black memory, or how photography could serve as an important resource for framing and mobilizing African-American social movements. Douglass frequently wrote about photography and deeply understood how it could serve as a necessary tool for Black people across the globe to be seen and represented as fully human. With this in mind, he demonstrated what Black freedom and dignity looked like: confident, in control, and unafraid. When he posed throughout his lifetime and became the most photographed person of the 19th century. Fellow abolitionist, women's rights activist, and orator Sojourner Truth sold carte de visite, or small-sized photographs often mounted on cardboard, which included the phrase, "I sell the shadow to support the substance, Sojourner Truth," at her lectures to earn a living. As she became increasingly popular, Truth shrewdly registered her carte de visite as engravings and in turn legally owned the copyright of her own image in her etchings. Upon this, Truth reflected that she used to be sold for other people's benefit, but now she sold herself for her own.
This act of re-envisioning how we see and make images is one in which Black female artists are tethered to the matrilineal precursors. And this connection is not rooted in a legacy filled with guilt and burden, but rather full of devotion and love. Black women and artists bind themselves together in this manner to continue the quest for Black freedom, ensure their histories are not forgotten, and bring forward the spirit of their ancestors, both familial and artistic. And the images we're sharing are throughout the book in different capacities. The images of children are images we asked some of the essayists and artists to provide if their work referenced their childhood. Okay. How do Black women artists hear the calls? Oh, I'm sorry, did I just read that? I read that? No. Okay. Thank you. Hi. How do Black women artists hear the calls of their maternal bonds, both living and dead? The whispers from the motherland spoken in a mother tongue? What do their answers look like? A visual exploration of Black motherhood through pictures made by Black female identifying photographers serves as a response to the call, a reflection of the past and a portal to the future. While there's no one story told by these artists, there's a thread or cord of sorts that connects their images and brings material reality of what cannot be seen but rather felt. In this, these artists begin to fill the gaps of representation of Black mothers and mothering of what Audre Lorde named the erotic, or, quote, the assertion of the life force of women, of that creative energy empowered, the knowledge and use of which we are now reclaiming in our language, our history, our dancing, our loving, our work, and our lives.
This act of knowing is often told in the secret language passed between mothers, daughters, kin, and defies time as seen in the works of Lê Hong, Delphine, Keisha Scarville, and Marcia Michael, who reminds us that we search for our mothers in order to find ourselves. Artist Nydia Blas reveals a visual meditation that is delicately spun into a mythical allegory with young Black women and girls fulfilling the roles of mothers, warriors, sirens, and saints. Photographer, writer, and curator Qiana Mestrich continues this repositioning of Black women and Black motherhoods in particular by properly placing them as the original makers and their children as collaborators with both inseparably connected to nature in the images included in this section. Andrea Chung's intricate and tactile collages elevates materials of the everyday and the natural world while reclaiming history, slavery, medicine, connections to the motherland, and how Black women continue to serve as the protectors of mothers, women, and babies. Through the use of collage, found objects, and magazine cuttings, artist Wengechi Mutu creates portraits that further explore colonialism and the impact of medical apartheid on Black women.
Notions of dignifying the ordinary are further developed by Dan Lawson and Micheline Thomas, who reveal the divine matrilineal legacy of Black people and Black women in particular to locate, quote, the magnificent and have it come through in the picture, end quote. Placing Black women in control of their image and legacy by unraveling false histories connected to place can be seen in the works of Nona Faustine and Samantha Box, who describes how, quote, in the chaos of these slippery intersections, there is a chance to measure my naughty, personal, ancestral, and historical narratives, end quote. While partaking in memory work, Ayanna V. Jackson evokes history through unearthing links to the past, unveiling and questioning what she has been taught to forget. In their photographs and three-dimensional creations, Vanessa German and Mary Sabande create a world that is reaffirming, exploratory, and fantastical, And this world, which incorporates elements of Afrofuturism, articulates a present and future experience that insists on the presence of Black women and girls made by Black women and girls. The artists in this special section serve as talisman, conjuring maternal and matrilineal legacies while reclaiming the innate Black brilliance of Black women through personal stories, history, political acts, connections to place, moments of pleasure, and communal celebration.
Research for this volume began in 2018, and throughout its creation, we were working together, but in our separate households, less than a mile apart. Our separation was due to the global pandemic that left the world with no choice but to bear witness to the murders of Black men, women, and children. As we hear the voice of George Floyd crying out for his mother with his last breath, Black mothers have not only been summoned at the moment, but have been answering this call as community anchors since time immemorial. Black mothers continue to be the truth bearers, showing us all another way of knowing. Will we listen?
Break, let everyone move their feet, get some water, and then we'll do a Q&A.
Sure.
Thank you.
Oh, yes. Now we'll start the Q&A portion of our evening. I have some just initial questions, but if you guys have any questions from the audience, feel free to raise your hands and shout them out as well. But thank you, Leslie and Zoraida, for joining me tonight. Your project is phenomenal. This book is just the amount of work, the volume of work in it, and the thinkers and the writers that you have, Renee Musai, like just incredible. And, lots of international contributors as well, which is just fantastic. So really, I hope you're super proud of this
Thank you.
massive project. And yeah, I hope that many photography education schools, universities adds this to their curriculums. I think it's a really important book. I can't really think of a book before this that sort of tackles this subject in such an in-depth way. But were there any books that sort of inspired you guys in terms of format or that you sort of looked at before while you were making this book?
I mean, as we mentioned, the We Wanted a Revolution was so that source book, like Leslie said, the source book, like my copy is just so worn, such a worn copy, and that really kind of opened things up. I feel like there were different shows that were really influential. I remember seeing like Carrie Mae Weems' show at the Guggenheim, and that was so big because I think for so many Black women and girls, you don't have references of Black women or girls making self-portraits. Like you have LaToya Ruth Frazier and you have Carrie Mae Weems, and seeing that show there was really, really huge for me.
I just want to also add, we're so happy the book has been made available open access through grants through the publisher Leuven and Knowledge Unlatched. So that was a really big deal for us to know that regardless of the cost, it can be downloaded. And in fact, we've heard from several people they will be adding it to a curriculum, which is just such an honor.
Yeah.
It's so incredible to us because, as you said, the different voices in the essays are some key voices on the subject. So everyone knows it's available open access, which is such a thrill. And then in terms of books, so the source book, if you all are familiar with that we're talking about, it's really just Xerox copies and photocopies of the way they of essays referenced in the show. It's really lo-fi. It's not anything. The structure is completely different than this. So that was kind of an inspiration for a next iteration. The dream is, you remember when you were younger, some of us in the room, you would go to the library and you'd open the back of the bibliography and go through the footnotes and then just begin the trail. That's kind of our goal for this, that everything referenced in this book would have something like that, to accompany this book. I think in terms of not structure, I think the structure, we really came up with that on our own. There's 5 sections covering different historical information, digital culture, maternal health, art, photography. And then we did really guard that last section of the book for a curated. We're really interested in curating our own little bit in the back, which we're really excited about. And then in terms of reading, one, for me personally, Dorothy Roberts is someone who I've turned to quite a bit. There's a book, Killing the Black Body. And then this essay that I've read so many times, it's called Racism and Patriarchy and the Meaning of Motherhood. It's from 1993, University of Pennsylvania. Just this phenomenal piece of writing. Actually reminds me quite a bit of some of your, the work that you were talking about. And then, of course, Jennifer Nash, I believe the most recent book is Birthing Black Mothers. So, but those are more academic books. There's not, as far as I remember, not image-based, but, definitely in the same space.
Yeah, and I think, each section of the book in the title references a Black woman author or an important body of work. So it references like June Jordan, Alice Walker, so Toni Morrison. And so we wanted to just reference these incredible women that have inspired us.
Yeah, which is great because there's often such a connection between literature and photography as well, especially in the works of the people that you've included in the book. So that's a really lovely structure that you guys have in the book. Can we talk a little bit about some of the sub-themes within the book? I think we sort of mentioned quite a bit, sort of Black maternal health, which is certainly an issue that's coming to the forefront in the last few years. But yeah, what are some of the other sort of sub-themes in the book that you guys talked about and touched on within the work that you showed?
I think, especially as a Black mother, it was really important to show that Black motherhood is also joyful. Like, it is beautiful and joyful, and Black mothers are also women, and Black mothers are these like independent beings. And Lizzie and I, it's funny, on the drive up, we were talking about some of an old PowerPoint, an old presentation we used to give. And we used the word resilience. And Leslie said, "Oh, I changed it." And I said, "Oh, I'm so glad. Like, I'm so glad you caught it, because just this idea of Black women needing to be resilient. And as you said, like a strong Black woman, and how Black mothers and mothering. So I think it's really important to know that we're not just talking about biologically birthing. It's also about like mothering community, and community comes in so many different forms. And to me, that is just so important to show that like Black motherhood is multidimensional.
And two other themes, I'm just looking at it now. There is a section, the second section, devoted a little bit to more historical archival images. And one thing that came up, which we loved, was thinking about Black women photographers as early entrepreneurs and having studio spaces. There's an article about some Canadian. Other one by Dr. Emily Brady. I like to make pictures of children, African American women, photographers wielding the weapon of motherhood. So thinking about the roots of WPR was really thinking about ways in which women have access in different ways than their male counterpart. And this essay was a deep and long essay, but really highlighting how Black female photographers were innovators in the field as well, and their access to family life in the photographs. And then Marley, of course.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Marley's essay, was super important to us as well.
Yeah, Marley is a friend I've known for many years and a writer. She is in Amsterdam, but she talks about social media and sexuality and kind of her journey through motherhood too. It's a really nice essay to include.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this reminds me a little bit of just something, as is a photography space, and we all love photography so much. One of the things that we neglected to mention was choosing which images should go in the book. So we took a few chances. One of the essays is a really powerful piece about welfare queen, digital life, culture, memes, derogatory memes. And in the original essay, of course, as an academic essay, it was reproduced, and we, along with the essayist, just decided we don't need to reproduce these.
Yeah.
If you want to see these, you know where to go find them. They're referenced. She describes them, and that felt like a really powerful decision that kind of set the tone for the rest of the book. So these things are mentioned, and of course we have to reference, but we don't need to reproduce necessarily. And then also you'll see in the book that we asked, I think we showed a few, some of the authors, the Tillotts and Regine and a couple of the other authors, they made reference to their mothers or childhood. We wanted to have some personal pictures too. Maybe going on too long about that, but we're really proud of that. We're really proud of asking for those and people being sure and telling us stories about their mom seeing the picture in the book and just being, why is that picture in this book again? Oh, that's great, because moms are the word, that's where it's at.
Thank you. Were there any surprises that came up in terms of connections between artists' works, or just things that you didn't expect maybe initially in the organizing of the book?
I was surprised that everyone said yes. Because because you don't expect people to say yes. And Leslie and I, we're just plugging away, doing our work. We don't We're not influencers or, and everyone said yes. And we were just pleasantly surprised. I remember there were there were days where we would send out an email and then like 2 seconds later someone would respond and we're like, oh my God, I can't believe they emailed us back. And so that was just such a really, really pleasant surprise.
I won't say who, but my absolute idol since I was 17 waited the longest to ask, but it was a key image for, I won't say where in the book. And I was walking my dog in the woods, as we do in Beacon, apparently a lot. She called my phone and I missed the call. But it was so beautiful. Like, this is it. You know, people were really excited about this project. And this is someone who was making work about this topic so many years ago. People are excited. They want to, they want to get involved. I mean, when we were in London at the Tate, we presented the paper on this project a couple of years ago. We saw Mary Sabande's work at the, what's that magical
Somerset
place?
House.
Somerset House. And her work, if anyone has not seen her work in person, that was just something that we knew. And her work is primarily three-dimensional and photographed. So that was something that we didn't expect. And that was someone we knew we wanted to bring in. Her slide was the last slide that came up, the purple and red. So I don't know if that's a connection, but it was an exciting moment.
Yeah, no, it must have been exciting to have some of the powerhouses that you have in the book. Deb Willis, Carrie Mae Weems, early Carrie Mae Weems photographs. That is gems. Yeah, some really some real gems.
I think there were, I would say there's one, there's just like often, there's sad connections. So like how the Moynihan report just keeps on coming up over and over again. You see Carrie Mae Weems talking about it in her work. And then you see, like 30 years later, Nona is talking about it in her work. And it's still this report that really haunts and just diminishes Black women and Black families.
Is there another edition coming? Was there anything left out that you didn't? I feel like you just probably scratched the surface, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I know that I see you looking at me. Like,
It's like work-life balance. What is that? What is that? We would do a million projects together. Like we also, we would just do this all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like all of these things are just seemingly getting worse, right? You mentioned the Moynihan report. These in the news right now. The family down in Texas who had their child taken. With child protection services, those kinds of stories with Black families in particular, Black mothering, the surveillance of Black mothering, like all of these stories. I guess it's where your radar is, but there's so many more things we could be talking about, but we just couldn't do everything in one book, right? We really think about this. I think we were talking earlier, who's the audience? And, my whole world is in photography. I don't want to speak for me personally, but, I'm always thinking about photographers, artists, how we would look at images together. But it also lives in public health. We've had people use the book for public health, for feminist studies, for African American studies, anthropology. It covers so much, right? Would you agree that we're just like touching the surface?
I think, we're just scratching the surface. And I'm saying this on the way up too, I would love to include more house mothers, right? Like more genderqueer artists, more house mothers, and talk about mothering through picking Black girlhood. I've just met like amazing young photographers that are mothering in their communities in just beautiful ways. And that's something I would, when we do a show, I'm not saying if, when we do our show, they will, they have to be a part of it.
There's going to be a lot of ephemera, a lot of books, a lot of objects, prints.
CPW show. I'll open it up to the floor and see if there's any questions from the audience. No pressure.
Yes, so tired of, I don't know, it's created like bullshit. Sometimes like we're bullshit. Like let it go on. There is a child or a subchild. There's a high profile, a low profile, low key. I think that's a beautiful thing, but,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was gonna ask you about the show, and I'm sure you, in the future, that will happen, and will be amazing. I was also gonna ask you if there's any artists that you've like discovered since you're looking out, that you wish, oh, we know about this person, and we go to them. I'm sure
You know, I would love, you know, like Miranda Barnes. We talk about like Miranda Barnes would be amazing. Someone who's in the girlhood show that I work with, like Jada Rodriguez. I would love to have her in the show. I mean, they're just. I feel like we're constantly, you know, early days of WPR, just like collecting, you know, tagging and keeping things.
Saved Instagram, and then
Yeah.
like that's really the
Yeah.
place, unfortunately. So many artists are in the. There's a bunch of artists in the UK. I can't believe London.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's more. Blanking on names, kind of at the moment, but.
No, Instagram is a great place of discovery still for artists. Any other questions?
Qiana, what about you? When's the book coming out?
When's the book coming out,
Which
Qiana?
book? What book? Oh, my Dodge and Bird book. I've been working on that for 6 years now. Yeah, I was pregnant with Imogen when I got the book contract, and that just came about. I was actually reviewing books. I was doing a peer review of other photography books, and then the editor was like, "Wait, you have a blog? Do you want to publish the book?" And I was like, "What?" So, but have been working on that for a long time, and have had multiple editors, but also life keeps getting in the way. Other work keeps getting in the way. My own artwork keeps getting in the way. So I'm trying to make that a priority this year for sure. But I'm not putting any dates to paper yet. But yeah, no, I'm hoping to get it done this year.
And for folks who don't know the blog, can you explain? Because it's quite a
It's a-
contribution. It's a
Yes, Dodge and Burn. So Dodge and Burn is a blog that I wrote for about 10 years, on and off. It was definitely a labor of love. It was a way for me. I have a completely whole other career in digital marketing, specifically in search engine marketing, working in corporate America for 20 plus years now. And it was a way for me to kind of get back into photography after feeling completely left out of it, and just disconnected from it. And started blogging like during my lunch breaks, at one particular job that I had. And started the blog as a way to sort of educate myself as well, because I formerly trained in photography, did black and white darkroom in high school for 3 years, and then color photography in college for 3 years. And in all of that education, felt like there were just a lot of voices missing. And during a one-on-one with my professor in college one day, I said, "Are we ever going to look at the work of Black photographers besides Gordon Parks and other Latin American photographers, Asian American photographers?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, why don't you go to the library and look up Lorna Simpson and Carrie Mae Weems?" Fortunately, my library, I went to Sarah Lawrence in Westchester. Fortunately, they did have their books. And so I was able to discover those two photographers on my own, but we never addressed anybody else in class. It was always, the typical road trip photographers that we looked at. And so for me, it was really a way to kind of educate myself, which oftentimes you have to do when society doesn't support you, right? And eventually it became this platform where I was like, okay, I'm going to interview photographers. I'm going to ask them how they got their start, because every photographer has a different story, which is really fascinating. A different story about how they came to photography, who gave them their first camera. I got my first camera, a Minolta X700, through a house parent of mine. I went to boarding school in Troy, New York, and I needed a camera for black and white photography 101, and I didn't have one. I also couldn't afford to buy one, and that's how I got my first camera. But yeah, I really wanted the interviews to be a place where other photographers of color could come and learn about people who are doing the same thing or just as obsessed about photography as they were, and have been able to really meet and connect with photographers all around the world through that blog, which is fantastic. It was something that I never expected, and this was a time when blogging was really popular. Now it's all about microblogging and social media, but yeah, so it'll be nice to kind of make the book be a final chapter almost of that work over 10 years.
And the book will be interviews and images, or you can't say?
The book will be interviews, definitely, essentially just putting the blog to print form, which is nice. And the blog has been used definitely in several photography curriculums. People have emailed me and told me that. But hopefully as a book, as a printed book, it'll also, and because Routledge is an academic publisher as well, hopefully it'll get kind of more circulation through the college and the university circuit.
And there are times too, Qiana, I will say, if I Google a Black photographer or a Latinx photographer, Dodge and Burn is the first thing that comes out. I mean, it really is this incredible resource. And I was telling Lizzie on the way up, like, I met Lola Flash through you, and we're such good friends, and you are really like a hub. You connect these photographers together that form really meaningful relationships.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. I was talking to Elia Alba the other day, who's a Dominican photographer that I interviewed early on, and I met her for the first time in person through a German artist who was here in the US the other day, and she was like, "Oh my God, you're Qiana, you're Dodge and Burn. Like, your blog was everything for photographers back then." I was like, wow. It's nice to hear that. Sometimes when you work online, you don't get to that face-to-face a lot. So you had a question.
I just wanted to ask, could you talk a little bit about what women picturing revolution is and how it worked a little bit?
Yeah, so Women Picturing Revolution really focuses on women identifying lens-based artists that document conflict, and conflict can be kind of out in the streets conflict, or it can be kind of conflict, quieter, private realm, domestic space conflicts. And so we put together panels. We've curated panels at ICP, at MICA. We have put together workshops. We lead half day or one day workshops as well. We conduct interviews with artists. But for the last few years, the focus, has been on the book. And I know both Leslie and I are kind of itching to get back to some of that core root WPR work.
And this is sort of becoming a source book that the other one was for you before.
I wouldn't say. I think the footnotes in here could be the source book. Yeah, I think the footnotes in this. There's so much juice in footnotes, right? I think that would be our source, our Black mothering source book.
Yeah. I mean, we're really looking at, it's just really just time. This just took a lot of time, and now we're out talking about the book. But I think we do have some things we're thinking about. There's all these artists working with environment and climate. And that's a particular interest of Zoraida's. That we would love to do another iteration of WPR in the classroom. It's just time, So now it's about, if we're able to take the book to different places, maybe faraway places, maybe we integrate a workshop. By the way, are we going to do that? So, if we're somewhere for a few days, it'd be wonderful again to have that, because it really is this thing where we get into conversation. We lecture a little bit, we look at work, and then we talk about the work. How are you feeling about the work? How's the work impacting you? Like, a lot comes up. So that's what WPR is at the base.
Yeah, and I think, another strength of WPR is the artists that we feature and the conversations that we have are super intergenerational.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I think both of us are just very proud of having these kind of cross-sectional conversations and highlighting just artists from around the world of different ages is just really important to kind of who we are too.
Yeah, that's something that we thought was missing too. That's just natural for us to want to listen to young voices and of all ages. I think there's a lot of focus on the in-between, but we've always been really drawn to that, hearing from everyone. So, yeah, I know we're talking for a while here, but questions?
No, I think we're getting close to time, unless anybody has anything else. I want to plug the,
Just one question, I just talked about over here, but where would be a ideal place to have the show be watched?
ooh, good question.
Yeah.
I think we have two ideas, right?
Go.
I mean, we're open to conversations about anything because I think it could be many things. But I think like thinking about our lives and where we are right now for long term, because it's reinventing the wheel all the time is not sustainable. I personally would love to have a university that was really invested, build out the show with us, maybe a catalog, something, and then that show travels because. Also, we could do some community programming. That's super important to bring in the folks that are local, the students. I think that would be like a dream scenario that it travels and that maybe we can go lecture. But this notion that it moves without us and we're not trying to reinvent it every time. However, if you were in an art institution, which you've done recently, well, it's an academic.
Yes,
as well.
Rutgers.
That visually sounds really interesting as well. So. And small places too. We're thinking about historical societies, like what is sustainable? Small little show that moves, the big art venue's a different beast, and then university.
Yeah, and I think we both really want to have a traveling exhibition, but at a place that is also accessible to the subject, right? So a place where like Black women, Black families, Black people can look at the work and see themselves in the work. But we are open.
That's so exciting. Did you have
Thanks
a
for
question?
asking.
Matt? No? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I want to plug actually our next
Yeah.
event that's going to
Okay.
be online, right? University of Oxford panel. That's Zoraida and Leslie
Not
are
bad.
going to host along with Jonathan.
So it's next Thursday
Go ahead.
online, Oxford University, and Dr. Emily Brady, who wrote in the book, invited us. And it will be Jonathan Michael Square, who is this most phenomenal
Follow him,
historian,
yeah.
curator, beautiful online presence, fashioning himself.
Yep.
And Qiana
Qiana.
Mestrich. We'll be talking about both their projects and their own work, but also focusing more on their contributions to the book as well. So we're really honored to be in that space. Rothmore American Institute.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, CPW, so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
CPW,
CPW.
Sarah, Nicole. You guys are phenomenal. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you to you three. That was fantastic. And we'll plug. Maybe you'll give us a link and we can put that online for next week. Please join us. We're here every Thursday. Next week we have Naki Gornan and Oliver Wasso, who are actually the collectors that are on view right now. They have a fantastic collection, both of them of photo booth pictures. So it'll be interesting to hear from them. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So much.
So many words.